Joining there, I see. Okay, well, let's get started. Well, first off, welcome everybody. My name is Adrienne Esposito, Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. We're going to give you a rundown of a very exciting ballot proposition called Prop 1 on the ballot this November 8th. It actually is very exciting. It's the first environmental bond act in 25 years, which we say it's a once in a generation opportunity, and once in 25 years actually is the next generation. So we are way overdue for an environmental bond act. And this one, as Julie and both Jessica will talk to you about, is going to fill critical needs. And that's the thing about this bond act, is that it is not something that is just, a feel-good bond act. This is something that actually prepares us to be stronger, healthier, safer for the future. It's $4.2 billion. And there are 4 different categories, which our presenters today will go over with you. So we really need for people to have an understanding of this bond act, but also to help us promote it. One of the challenges we are facing is that it's a very quiet bond act. And maybe that's not so bad, because I'm going to knock on wood when I say this. That's what the knocking is. So far to date, there is no organized opposition yet, but that doesn't mean that we're going to be sailing into success. And that's why we need all of you to help us. So our speakers today are going to be 2 people who are instrumental in getting this on the ballot and have worked for several years to make this come to fruition. So we have with us Jessica Otney from the Nature Conservancy and Julie Ty from the New York State League of Conservation Voters. So I think, Jessica, are you starting off?
I'm going to share my screen and Julie can kick us off.
Okay.
So Adrienne, thank you so much for having us. I think Jess and I and you have all done so many shows about this, because we are all working hard to get out the word and to make sure everybody knows about the ballot measure. So we're really excited that the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act will be on the ballot this November 8th. What is a bond act? I think a lot of people have these questions. This is an opportunity for the people, the voters of the state of New York, to tell the government how they want some of their tax dollars to be spent. It's a measure that will be located in everywhere in the state except in Nassau County on the back of the ballot. Nassau County, it'll be on the bottom of the ballot on the first page. And it really is an opportunity for people to say to the government, thank you for putting this up for the environment. We want you to spend our tax dollars in this particular way. It's going to make sure that we're improving public health, we're protecting clean water, we're improving our quality of life. And some of the ways it's going to do that, and Jess will get into much more detail about this, is providing funding to help safeguard our drinking water and preventing contamination and runoff and pollution. And we all know that I think Steve Ballone declared nitrogen public enemy #1 for water quality several years ago. And we know that folks on Long Island know how important that is, helping us to address some of those items that are polluting our water. We know we need to be modernizing our infrastructure and helping to revitalize the economy. Conducting infrastructure projects generates jobs. And we know that we're going to get, $7 of return for every dollar that we invest in infrastructure and protecting our environment. We may need to make sure that we're improving our public health and our safety. Long Island is at risk from hurricanes and storm surge and sea level rise. And this bond act will help make sure that there are more tools in place and more projects that can help to protect our communities, also help us to reduce air pollution and reduce water pollution, which both contribute to public health concerns like asthma and potential increasing your risk of cancer. And of course, really critical is making sure that we're protecting our natural resources. They help us protect our water supply. They provide an opportunity for us to recreate, to connect with nature, which we know helps improve our own health. And it will help us to support family farms and protecting them and other wildlife habitat as we do this. You can go to the next slide. So real broadly, and then Jess is going to go into much more detail, there are 4 big buckets of how the funding will be spent under the Bond Act. There's $650 million for water quality and resilient infrastructure. There's $650 million for open space conservation and recreation. So that's land acquisition, but also improvements to parks and open spaces for access for the public. There's $1.1 billion for making sure that restoring natural supports for our communities and reducing flood risk, as well as potentially for helping our communities, with things like buyouts and elevating homes. And there's $1.5 billion for climate change mitigation, so that we're reducing the amount of carbon dioxide that we're putting out into the environment, and we're reducing air pollution. What's really critical about all of this is it's really going to enable us to draw down a lot of the infrastructure funding that Congress passed in 2021, which I think is really, really important, right? It's not going to be just state dollars. It's not going to be just state and local dollars. It's going to enable us to put down, pull down those federal dollars. And we believe that this will actually result in about $8 billion worth of infrastructure projects and generate a whole bunch of jobs, which I think we're going to get into a little bit more later.
Great, thanks, Julie. So I'll take you through a little more detail on each of the programs Julie just mentioned. And the first one is clean water. And thanks to Adrian and Citizens Campaign for the Environment and so many Long Island leaders, this is a major issue that places like Long Island, but also our leaders in the Finger Lakes, in the Thousand Islands, in the Adirondacks are really focused on. We have pollution entering our bays and harbors and rivers from wastewater infrastructure that needs to be repaired and upgraded. It needs to be upgraded so that it can better treat pollution. And we also have big issues with our drinking water system. A lot of it is a century old, 100 years. Just last week in the city of Newburgh, a major pipe that was installed 100 years ago burst. And not only did it ruin the road, snarled traffic, created boil water advisories, it shut down a school. So, these things are serious health concerns and also disruptive in our daily lives when they go wrong. And we need to make sure that we are focused on continuing to provide New Yorkers the clean drinking water they depend on and protecting our waterways like our bays and harbors from pollution. Again, as Julie said, this has huge, huge potential to leverage funding from the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's a big job creator. Open space conservation and recreation. Obviously, I work for the Nature Conservancy. We love open space conservation. But yes, John Turner. But in all seriousness, during COVID, we saw people flocking to state parks, to nature preserves. At the Nature Conservancy, we saw a 300% increase in people using our protected lands. Likewise, state parks, New York City parks, local parks, we're seeing explosions of uses. People were flocking to open spaces because it was a safe thing to do. It was a safe place to recreate, to get out with the family when you couldn't do indoor activities. But we've also known, and people have come to know again, that having access to nature is critical for health and well-being. It's a place people go for solace. It's a place people go to hunt and for food. Likewise, our local farms, making sure that they're able to stay in farming. These are huge amenities in our community. We rely on them for fresh and healthy food. And so this Bond Act will help us continue a long tradition in New York State of conserving the nature that we all depend on. It'll also help pay for the infrastructure that's necessary to make sure that people can get out there and safely enjoy these places. Flood risk reduction and resilient infrastructure. We have seen over and over and over again now storms battering our coasts, flooding our rivers and our lakes. And even on sunny days now, we have neighborhoods that are flooding. Climate change isn't a thing that's off into the future. Climate change is here. And one of the deadliest impacts for New Yorkers is water, too much water. So this Bond Act will really steer into making sure that we address this in a number of ways. Obviously, major infrastructure upgrades. Parts of our transportation infrastructure need to be rebuilt so that they can handle more water. My favorite nerdy thing to talk about is culverts, which are the pipes that run under our roads where our roads cross waterways like streams. When the water comes in big volumes, as it's happening now with all the flash flooding we're seeing and big storms, those culverts blow out and the road blows out with it. And that means that in some areas, people can't access their homes, hospitals, work for a long time if the road repair takes time. So these are major issues, and it's happening on Long Island. It's happening in upstate New York and the Adirondacks and Western New York. We need to make sure that our infrastructure is built to last, and that means built for a changing climate. Likewise, we also need to restore the nature that can act as a buffer to us, our wetlands, our forests, our stream beds, and the areas around our streams and rivers can all hold water and buffer us from the impacts of flooding. And this Bond Act will support that kind of natural restoration and green infrastructure as well. And finally, climate change mitigation. What does that mean? That means reducing the pollution that's causing climate change and impacting people's health. So this program is really focused on reducing climate change pollution in a couple of ways. The first is supporting clean and green school buses. Nobody wants that yellow bus chugging through the neighborhood 5 or 6 times a day. You know, we have like 8 buses that come down my street every day. No one wants to see that big poof of black smoke come out of the back of that as kids are boarding the bus every day. Similarly, making sure that our large state and public facilities, it might be state offices, it might be college campuses, places like SUNY Buffalo, SUNY Stony Brook, CUNY facilities, and also our public schools, our local schools, making sure that they're energy efficient and that we can add renewable energy to them. These are places where we don't have to impact a farm or a forest to add things like solar energy. So it's a really exciting opportunity. And a lot of Healthy Schools advocates have joined our campaign for the Bond Act because they know as we improve energy efficiency in these school buildings, we're also updating things like the HVAC systems. My daughter's school is so old that when COVID happened and they suggested all these different filters, MERV this, MERV that, we couldn't do MERV anything because our heating system in the school is so old that it just doesn't work with a filter like that. So this will allow for healthier air for the kids, for the teachers, for the workers, and also more opportunity to save energy. I talked about flooding. The other deadly threat of climate change to New Yorkers is heat. And when it gets hot in New York, and this is all around the state, I'm going to use New York City as an example. We know from science that the distribution of nature in our city, our urban forest, is not equitable. New York City is actually a pretty green place. I think almost 25% of New York City is forested or has natural areas. That's wonderful. But the neighborhoods that have that nature are the more rich neighborhoods, the more well-off neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods that have higher populations of poor people, low-income people, higher populations of Black and Brown New Yorkers, higher populations of people with comorbidities like diabetes and asthma and heart disease. They have less nature. That means that in those places, when a heat wave happens, it becomes deadly and more of those people die. This is happening in New York City. This is happening in Yonkers. This is happening in Rochester. We can fix this by making sure that we're investing in urban forestry, in things like green roofs, and in things like cooling centers. It might not just be nature. It might be simply a place, a safe place to go to escape deadly heat when you don't have air conditioning in your dwelling. Couple of exciting and unique things about this Bond Act, and then I'll turn it over back to Julie. The first is jobs. And, you know, this is something that obviously as our economy continues to recover from COVID, we need to make sure not only are we just creating any jobs, we're creating good paying, family sustaining jobs for New Yorkers. And about a year ago, AECOM did a study on this Bond Act, and they actually quantified the job creation potential of this measure. And they found that this Bond Act will support nearly 100,000 good jobs. And that was before all that leveraged funding with the federal government from programs that have recently passed, like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. These are jobs that have a career track. These are jobs that have safety standards and training. So these are jobs that can really lead into a career for the future as we build a more sustainable New York. And likewise, we talked a little bit about this during heat, but we have disadvantaged communities in New York State. What does that mean? That means there are a lot of places, and these are places on Long Island, places in New York City, places in upstate New York, rural places, urban places. We have them everywhere. These are places where people have been disproportionately subjected to pollution and also are suffering from other factors, whether it's unemployment, low income, historic redlining, or health impacts. Our climate law is requiring us to define these places based on data and science. That's happening right now. What this Bond Act is going to do is invest at least 35 to 40% of the funding into these places to make sure that not only are we protecting our environment, but we're making changes so that the people who have been most harmed by pollution see benefits. And that's very exciting. Julie, I'll turn it back over to you. Oh, you're on mute.
I know, I just said that. That's a bit of information about what's in there. I know it's not like we don't have specifics on what projects there are because local governments and not-for-profits are going to go through competitive grant programs that will be administered by the state. So I think it's really important for us to get this funding approved, and for us to do that, we need to get people ready to vote. So we've just passed the voter registration deadline. If you're not already registered, you need to have done so by October 14th. You have until tomorrow, if you've changed address, to submit that into the Board of Elections. You can do that either online, or you can do it in person or on mail. So that's really important to make sure that you're ready to vote. That's first and foremost. Then you have a few options for how do you go out and vote. One is if you're not going to be around near the election, then you should go and request an absentee ballot. The deadline to mail in an application for an absentee ballot is October 24th. You have to get that application in person in by November 7th, which is the day before the election. Many times I've been working on a campaign and I've gone and I voted in person actually at the Board of Elections the day before. Now it's easier though. We don't have any excuses because you can vote early. Right, we have early voting. It started a few years ago. It starts this year on October 29th and it runs through November 6th. What's really important about that is that it may not be your usual location. So before you go to vote early and get frustrated, you should check where your early voting location is and make sure that you go out and do that. I can tell you from experience, because we're an organization that always encourages people to get out and vote. I have not once voted on election day. I vote early since I moved to New York City. And let me tell you, there's no lines. It's fantastic, right? You go, it's early, you get in, you get out, you're not spending a lot of time waiting on lines the way you would be on election day. So we really encourage people to get out early to make sure that you're doing that. And then last, of course, that runs October 29th through November 6th, right? So we have 9 days where you can go in person and vote early. And then, of course, Election Day runs from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. on Tuesday, November 8th. So that's your last chance to make sure that you're voting on the Bond Act and to make sure that you're getting the word out to your friends and your family. We can go to the next slide. So we are encouraging more people to join us. So the main actions that you can do is obviously, first and foremost, we want you to vote on the proposition. Again, everywhere except Nassau County in the state of New York, it's on the back of the ballot. And we did check with all the Board of Elections across the state. In Nassau County, it's going to be on the front, but it's going to be on the bottom. So make sure you go and you find it. You should make a plan to vote, right? Make sure that you know where you're voting, that you're registered to vote before you go, so that you're not, you're not finding out last minute there's something wrong or you're in a new location, because it does change from time to time where you actually vote. Make a pledge to vote. We've created our coalition, which is made up of labor unions and environmental groups and business community and civic organizations like the League of Women Voters. Thank you for highlighting that earlier. We have a coalition. We've put it together a pledge. It's available on our coalition's website, which is voteyescleanwaterandjobs.com. We're very subtle with what we're going for here. And we encourage you to do that and see some more of the information and some of the news that we've been generating around the Bond Act. And of course, we have social media properties. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, where it's at NY Bond Act is where you can find us on all of those. Of course, Adrian and I have been doing a lot of TV shows on local TV and on Long Island with some of the town supervisors. We're going to be seeing a lot more, I think, press coverage on this. This week, Newsday just did an article of an explainer, and a number of our organizations are talking to more newspapers to help elevate the word about the Bond Act. But that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, one thing I don't think you guys talked about, but could you mention, because this is the most commonly asked question, is it going to raise taxes? So,
No, the short answer to that is no.
No, I know, tell everyone else.
Yes. So the Bond Act was negotiated as part of the state budget. There are no new taxes associated with this measure. It's planned for in the state's financial plan that there would be this expenditure of funds. And so there's no new taxes associated with this Bond Act. And I think what's more important, we actually had a good conversation about this with the East Hampton town supervisor yesterday, that this could potentially save local taxpayer dollars, because by coupling state funding, hopefully with federal funding and with local funding, it reduces the cost of a project at the local level. It also enables more projects to get done. And I think we can't talk about this enough. When we're spending dollars, as Jessica talked about, to reduce the impacts associated with flooding and storms, for example, it saves money because it's a lot cheaper. You know, it's that old adage, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's exactly the case here. And there's been studies that show that for $1 invested in protecting communities, you save $6 in storm cleanup afterwards.
I just want to accent one of, I think, the favorite things for us in this bill. I mean, it's all great, but is the money for water. And if you read the paper, which I know all of you do, and that's why you've joined today, there's a lot of emerging contaminants that are being found in our drinking water supplies, and to filter them out costs money. But our goal is to keep water not only clean, but also affordable. So some of the costs for that filtration can be shared by state grants. I was with a different town supervisor yesterday. They got a state grant of $5 million to filter out PFOA and PFAS, but they still had to chip in $3 million of town taxpayer dollars to filter it out for their water district. So this does cost money, and having this Bond Act will help save us money in the long run. And I think that's very significant. So do people have questions? You can just raise your hand, or you can just unmute yourself and chime in. John?
Yeah, the question about not surprisingly, I'm going to ask about open space. Would I assume that it would be that, again, the state open space plan that would guide the acquisitions made under the Bond Act?
Yeah, so right now the state is in the process of updating the open space plan, and that's a wonderful thing because there are regional committees from every region of the state that guide that plan. And the state's open space plan is an opportunity for people to identify locally valuable and important areas, and the state would then be working with organizations like local land trusts or directly with willing landowners. And all of the state's land acquisition done under this program will be with willing participants, willing landowners, both our farmers and our owners of open space like forests.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say, I see some folks put in the chat they'd like lawn signs. I can only get to the ones on Long Island where I live, but I see that we have somebody in the Fairport. I don't know if Jessica.
My parents' hometown. Yay, Fairport. I will have to reach out to an organization. We did do a small run of lawn signs, and they're being distributed. So I can find out if there's any that are not yet spoken for, Dave, and see what I can do about getting you a lawn sign.
There was someone in Geneva as well. It's in that same neighborhood.
If you all could put your emails in the chat as well, that would be helpful to me. Thank you.
Christine is in Geneva who wanted a sign.
Yeah, I don't know how many we have in those areas, so I'll see what I can do.
Okay, and I'll take care of the 2 requests for Long Island, Babylon and my buddy John. Okay, also I just wanted, there's a question here in the chat about, and And sadly, the answer is no. But the question is, have the Board of Elections been contacted to train poll workers to tell people to turn the ballot over?
That's a good
No.
question. Well,
It's a great question.
and like I think it's really poll location by poll location how seriously and affirmatively the poll workers can or are willing to talk to voters. Oftentimes, my neighbor Bob is one of my poll workers, and he always says, "Don't forget the back." I almost forgot the back last year, which is saying something. So a lot of the poll workers do. They do remind people, but I don't think it's consistent. There is information on all the propositions on the Board of Elections website. And another website people can go to is vote411.org. Again, that's a nonpartisan site that the League of Women Voters puts together every year that has information. But this is the reason we're asking folks to engage with us on social media, is to remind friends and remind family and remind neighbors that there's more stuff to vote on and to flip the ballot. Look for Prop 1, find it at the bottom if you're in Nassau County, find it on the back. So you can actually play a big part in that as well. I'll put the direct links to the 3 social media platforms in the chat. But on Facebook, there's actually an event that's I'm voting for the Bond Act, join me. And you can invite your friends and family who are also on Facebook to join you. And that'll also be another reminder for them to flip their ballot and look for Prop 1. So there's a lot of work that you all can do to help us get people flipping their ballot and voting on Prop 1.
And Jess put the links, if she didn't mention this, I'm going to reiterate it. She put the links in the chat earlier to where the Vote Yes site to take a pledge to vote. And also there's a parallel education campaign at nybondact.edf.org that Jess also put the chat in the link in the chat for folks. But it's really important, right? We need to make sure that people are finding this ballot measure on their ballots when they go to vote this November, that you're getting your friends and family. You obviously all care enough about the environment to come learn more about it. And we hope that you take this back and like educate more people and really use your social media to help, get the word out about it.
I mean, we've been talking to a lot of people and I've been doing a lot of presentations, as has Julie and Jess, on this. And most people, once they hear about it, they think it's great. So for us, it's a matter of getting the word out. We're not, trying to convince people. We're simply trying to educate people who are already going to the polls that this is available to them. So any way you guys could help would be great. And it would be very much appreciated. Any other last questions for our guest speakers? If not, I want to thank you guys very, very much for taking time out of your busy days to listen in and to help, promote the idea or promote the voting for the Environmental Bond Act. And if you need anything, please email me. We have door knockers here. We have flyers. It's 2-page educational material. So if you'd like to help disseminate some of it, we'd be grateful for your assistance. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great stuff.
Thanks for hosting, Adrian.
Yeah, thanks for
All right.
hosting.
Bye, Neil. Bye, John.
Bye-bye.